My name is Linnea. I am 28 years old, and exactly 1 week ago, I handed a tired woman in a driveway a crumpled $5 bill for a painting of a dreary, unremarkable storm over a harbor. It was caked in decades of nicotine, stains and dust, housed in a chipped wooden frame that smelled like damp, basements and forgotten things. I didn't buy it because it was beautiful. I bought it because I noticed the weight of the canvas, the unusual thickness of the impasto in the lower right corner, and the strange, almost imperceptible, geometric lines hiding beneath the painted clouds. Today, a man in a tailored charcoal coat stood on the porch of my cramped, fourth-floor walk-up apartment. He didn't knock like a salesman. He knocked like a man who had been hunting for something his entire life. When I opened the door, his eyes bypassed me entirely, landing directly on the kitchen table where that $5 painting was currently stripped of its frame, resting under my magnifying lamp. "You have absolutely no idea what you've bought, do you?" he asked. His voice was quiet, carrying the faint, clipped precision of old European money. "I bought a mid-century harbor scene painted by an amateur who didn't understand perspective," I replied, keeping my hand on the doorknob. He finally looked at me. "My name is Cassian. The man who painted that harbor scene was my grandfather, and what he painted it over is going to destroy the most powerful art dynasty in this country. Before I tell you what was hiding under those painted clouds, and before I explain how a $5 garage sale find became the weapon I used to detonate my own family's legacy, I need to take you back 3 years. I need to take you to a mahogany-paneled boardroom at the Sterling Institute of Fine Arts, to the exact moment I realized that in my family, blood wasn't thicker than water. Blood was just another currency to be traded for prestige. Before we dive into the wreckage, I want you to take a second. If you have ever been the black sheep of your family, if you have ever been told that your morals make you difficult or that your truth is an embarrassment, I want you to leave a comment right now. Tell me you understand. Because the isolation of being the only honest person in a room full of liars is a very specific kind of hell. Growing up, the hierarchy in our household was established with brutal clarity. My father, Alistair, was a senior board member of the Sterling Institute, a man who measured human worth entirely by net worth and gallery acquisitions. My mother, Genevieve, was a socialite whose primary occupation was ensuring our compassion family name remained untarnished in the society pages. And my older sister, Serafina, was their masterpiece. Serafina played the harp, spoke fluent French, and knew exactly how to flatter billionaire donors at charity galas. Then there was me. I didn't care about the galas. I cared about the art. I spent my childhood in the archives of the Institute, running my fingers over the frames of forgotten masters, studying brushstrokes, learning the chemical compositions of pigments, understanding how history layered itself onto canvas. My parents viewed my obsession as a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. Linnea is our little academic. My mother would sigh to her friends over champagne, using the word academic the way one might say afflicted. She prefers the dusty basement to the ballroom. We just let her be. But I didn't just stay in the basement. By 25, I had earned my master's degree in art history and authentication, and I secured a position as a junior appraiser at the Sterling Institute. I didn't get the job because of my father's influence, though he certainly claimed the credit. I got it because I had an eye that my professors called once in a generation. I could spot a forged provenance document from 10 feet away. I could look at the crocular, the fine pattern of cracks on an old painting, and tell you if it was naturally aged over 300 years or baked in a fraudster's oven last Tuesday. Which brings us to the day everything shattered. October 14th. Julian Sterling, the CEO of the Institute and the reigning king of the city's art elite, had called an emergency board meeting. He was unveiling the Prettyfightus 20Cs, Institute's latest acquisition, a supposedly newly discovered landscape by the 17th century Dutch master, Aelbert Cuyp. It was to be the centerpiece of the upcoming Centennial Gala, expected to draw tens of millions in new donor funding. Julian stood at the head of the long table, his silver hair catching the recessed lighting, a smug, aristocratic smile on his face. My father sat to his right, beaming with proxy pride. "This piece," Julian announced, gesturing to the canvas resting on the display easel, "will redefine our Dutch Golden Age collection. We have the provenance. We have the press ready. All we need is the final authentication signature from our internal team. He looked down the table to where I sat, the youngest person in the room by 2 decades. He slid a thick, cream-colored folder toward me. Linnea, my dear. Your signature on the appraisal, please. I didn't reach for the pen. My stomach was a cold, tight knot. I had spent the last 48 hours in the lab with that painting. I had run the infrared, reflectography. I had analyzed the pigment core samples. I can't sign this, Julian, I said. My voice was quiet, but in that silent room, it sounded like a gunshot. My father's smile vanished. Linnea, what are you doing? Sign the document. I can't, I repeated, looking directly at Julian. The provenance is fabricated. The lead tin yellow pigment used in the sky contains microscopic traces of modern synthetic binding agents. Aelbert Kuyp died in 1691. This painting was executed no earlier than 1920. It's a forgery, a very good one. But a forgery. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my father, expecting him to defend me, expecting him to demand answers from Julian. Instead, I saw a vein throbbing in his temple. His eyes were wide with a fury so pure it paralyzed me. Julian didn't shout. He didn't even drop his smile. He simply leaned forward, resting his hands on the mahogany table. Linnea, art authentication is a subjective science. You are very young. You lack the broader perspective. Required to understand a piece of this magnitude, 3 independent, highly respected European authenticators have already verified it. They were paid to verify it. I shot back, the adrenaline finally overriding my fear. The pigment analysis doesn't lie, Julian. If you hang this in the Doppler gallery, you are defrauding the public and our donors. Enough! My father slammed his hand onto the table. He stood up, his chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. You will apologize to Miss Sterling immediately. You are a junior employee who has clearly let a shred of authority go to her head. Dad, I have the lab reports. I don't care about your little reports, he snapped, his voice echoing off the paneled walls. You are embarrassing me. You are embarrassing this institution. Sign the damn paper, Linnea. I looked around the table. 14 board members, 14 men and women of Slook, immense wealth and power. None of them were looking at the painting. They were all looking at me with the same expression of irritated disdain. They didn't care if it was a fake. They cared about the gala. They cared about the gala narrative. They cared about the money. I picked up the pen. My father let out a heavy sigh of relief. Julian's smile widened into something victorious. I didn't sign the paper. I placed the pen down horizontally across the folder, pushed my chair back and stood up. No, I resign. I walked out of the boardroom. I didn't pack up my desk. I just walked out into the crisp October air, naive enough to believe that my integrity would be a shield, that the truth would eventually come out and vindicate me. I had vastly underestimated what powerful people will do to protect their lives, and I had entirely misunderstood my own family's capacity for cruelty. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, Julian Sterling had already made his moves. He didn't just accept my resignation. He formally terminated me for gross incompetence and erratic behavior. He sent a memo to every major gallery, museum, and appraisal firm in the state, quietly blacklisting me. A word of warning about a troubled young woman whose judgment couldn't be trusted. But the real betrayal didn't come from Julian. It came 3 days later, at the Plaitas Tardite, Sunday family dinner I was foolish enough to attend. I walked into my parents' dining room. The table was set with the good silver. Serafina was sitting next to her new fiancé, Silas. Silas Sterling, Julian's nephew. Well, my mother said, not looking up from her salad. The prodigal daughter graces us with her presence. Have you finished throwing your little tantrum? Mom, he's committing fraud, I pleaded, standing at the edge of the room. He is passing off a 20th century fake as a masterpiece. If the press finds out, the press won't find out, my father interrupted, cutting his steak with clinical precision. Because the painting is authentic. Julian has the beanie certificates. Those certificates are bought. And who are you to question Julian Sterling? My father demanded, finally. Looking at me, his eyes were completely devoid of warmth. You are a 25-year-old girl who just threw away her career because she wanted to. Play detective. Do you have any idea the position you've put me in? The position you've put your sister in? Serafina let out a delicate, practiced sigh. It's extremely selfish, Linnea. Silas's family is hosting our engagement party next month. Uncle Julian has been nothing but generous to us, and you tried to publicly humiliate him. Silas was mortified. I was doing my job, I said, my voice breaking. I looked at my father, begging him to see me. Dad, I was protecting the institute. I was protecting you. If that forgery gets exposed, the board goes down with him. My father placed his knife and fork down. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. You are no longer welcome at the institute, Linnea. And until you formally apologize to Julian, in writing, you are no longer welcome in this house. I stared at him. The chandelier light caught the silver in his hair, the gold of his cufflinks. You're kicking me out? Over a painting? I am distancing this family from a liability, he corrected coldly. You have always been difficult, Linnea. You have always tried to undermine your sister's happiness, and now you are trying to undermine my career. I won't allow it. Apologize or leave. I didn't apologize. For the next 3 years, I was a ghost. The blacklisting was ruthlessly effective. Every museum application was rejected. Every gallery job evaporated. The moment they checked my references, I had to pay my rent, so I took a job at a small, independent custom framing shop on the edge of the city, working for $10 an hour. I spent my days cutting mapboard and framing cheap vacation photos, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and glue, completely cut off from the world I had trained my whole life to inhabit. My family kept their promise. They erased me. I wasn't invited to Serafina and Silas's lavish wedding at the plaza. I saw the photos on Instagram. My father walking her down the aisle, my mother weeping delicate tears of joy, Julian, Sterling toasting the happy couple. I spent that evening eating takeout on my faded couch, listening to the rain hit my window, realizing that my parents didn't love me conditionally. They simply didn't love me at all. I was just a prop in their play, and when I stopped reading my lines, I was written out of the script. Which brings us to last Tuesday, the garage sale. I was driving my beat-up Honda Civic through a neighborhood of aging bungalows, running an errand for the frame shop when I saw the cardboard sign. Estate. Sale. Everything must go. I don't know why I pulled over. Instinct, maybe. Or maybe just a desperate need. To be around old things. Things with history. Even if that history belonged to strangers. The house belonged to an elderly woman who had recently passed away in a nursing home. Her exhausted-looking daughter was running the sale, sitting on a folding chair in the driveway, watching strangers pick through her mother's life. I bypassed the chipped china and the boxes of romance novels, drawn immediately, to a stack of framed pictures leaning against a folding table. Most of it was junk, mass-produced prints from the 70s, faded photographs. But at the back of the stack, facing the wall, was a canvas. I pulled it out. It was a harbor scene. Dark, brooding clouds, a rocky shoreline, a single ship tossed by waves. It was signed in the bottom corner, with a single initial, E. It was an ugly painting. The composition was heavy, the colors muddy. But as my fingers traced the surface of the canvas, my breath hitched. The texture was wrong. When an artist paints a canvas, the brushstrokes follow the forms they are painting. The impasto, the thick peaks of paint, should align with the clouds, the waves, the rocks. But as I tilted the painting to catch the afternoon sunlight, the raised ridges of paint beneath the surface didn't match the harbor scene at Bright Hes. All, under the dark, muddy water, I could feel the distinct, raised outline of what felt like a face. Under the heavy gray clouds, the unmistakable, rigid geometry of architectural columns. Someone hadn't just reused a canvas to save money. This wasn't a sketch painted over by a starving artist. The harbor scene had been applied thickly, desperately, with the sole purpose of burying whatever was underneath it. How much for this one? I asked the woman in the folding chair, trying to keep my voice steady. She barely looked at it. $5. I handed her the crumpled bill from my pocket. I put the painting in the passenger seat of my car and my hands were shaking on the steering wheel the entire drive back to my apartment. For the next 6 days, my small kitchen became a makeshift restoration laboratory. I bought specialized solvents, cotton swabs, and a UV light with the Platazin and an Eldair. Little savings I had. I locked my door, drew the blinds, and set to work. Removing an overpainting is a delicate, agonizing process. One wrong swipe of solvent can eat through the varnish and destroy the original piece beneath. I started in the upper left corner, using a Q-tip dipped in a mild ethanol solution, rolling it gently over the muddy gray clouds of the harbor scene. It took 4 hours just to dissolve an area the size of a postage stamp. When the gray paint finally lifted, wiping away onto the cotton swab, a flash of brilliant, unmistakable color shone through the grime. Lapis lazuli blue, not modern synthetic ultramarine. Authentic, crushed lapis lazuli. The kind of pigment that, in the Renaissance and Baroque periods, was worth more than gold. My heart hammered against my ribs. I worked through the night, my back aching, my eyes burning. By dawn on the third day, I had cleared a section the size of a Darien playing card. I stared at it under the magnifying lamp, my breath catching in my throat. It was an eye, a perfectly rendered, luminous human eye, looking upward, framed by the delicate edge of a golden halo. The brushwork was masterful, possessing a translucent, glowing quality that could only be achieved through dozens of Daxisli NS. Impossibly thin glazes. I knew this technique, I knew this era. By day 5, I had uncovered enough of the underlying canvas to recognize what it was, and when I finally understood what was sitting on my kitchen table, the blood drained from my face, and I had to sit down on the floor because my knees wouldn't support me. It wasn't just a masterpiece, it was a ghost. I was looking at the Weeping Madonna, a mid-16th century Italian panel, painting attributed to the school of Titian. It was one of the most famous lost paintings in art history. It had been stolen in 1943 during the chaotic looting of Europe, vanishing from a private collection in Florence. For 80 years it had been a phantom, a myth, whispered about in auction houses. And yet, here it was. In an apartment in the city, bought for $5 at a garage sale. But that wasn't the detail that made me slide to the floor. That wasn't the detail that made my hands tremble. As I carefully removed the backing board from the cheap frame to inspect the wood stretchers behind the canvas, a folded piece of brittle, yellowed paper slipped out from the gap between the canvas and the wood, fluttering to the wood, linoleum floor. I picked it up with tweezers. It was a letter, dated the 12th of November, 1951. It was handwritten in fading black ink. I read the words, and the entire universe tilted on its axis. The letter was a detailed, meticulously catalogued ledger. It listed not just the Weeping Madonna, but 22 other priceless works of art that had been smuggled out of Europe after the war. And at the bottom of the ledger, signing off on the illicit transfer of stolen decadent cultural heritage, was a signature I would recognize anywhere. A signature I had seen on plaques, on hospital wings, on the letterhead of the institute that had fired me. Elias Sterling, Julian Sterling's father, the revered founder of the Sterling Art Foundation. The narrative the Sterlings had sold to the world, the story of their noble, self-made wealth built on brilliant investments and legitimate gallery acquisitions, was a total lie. Their entire empire, their billion-dollar foundation, the prestige that my father groveled for, was built on the prestige, trafficking of stolen art. The Weeping Madonna had been their crown jewel, the asset they used as collateral to build their dynasty, before it suddenly went missing from their own secret vaults. Someone had painted the ugly harbor scene over it to hide it. Someone had hidden the ledger behind it. And now, I had it. The weapon that could destroy the man who ruined my life, and the family that threw me away. I was still sitting on the floor, staring at the letter, when the heavy, authoritative knock echoed through my apartment. Which brings us back to today. To the man in the tailored charcoal coat standing in my doorway, looking at the half-restored Madonna on my table. "My name is Cassian," he had said. "The man who painted that harbor scene was my grandfather. And what he painted it over is going to destroy the most powerful art dynasty in this country." I stared at him, gripping the doorknob so tightly my knuckles ached. "Who are you?" I whispered. Cassian stepped fully into the light of the hallway. He had sharp, intelligent eyes, dark and assessing, and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from marble. There was a quiet, vibrating intensity to him, the aura of a man who had been at war in the shadows for a very long time. "I'm the rightful heir to the collection Elias Sterling stole," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "And Julian Sterling just found out. You have the painting. We have about 20 minutes before his fixers kick down your door. Are you going to invite me in, Linnea, or are we going to let the cries, 'People who ruined your life,' take this away from you too?" I didn't step back immediately. My mind fractured into a dozen competing to the dozen warnings, a chaotic collision of logic and sheer, paralyzing terror. You don't survive 3 years as an outcast in this city by trusting wealthy men in personams, tailored coats who show up at your door unannounced. But as I stared into Cassian's eyes, I didn't see the predatory arrogance I was so used to seeing in Julian Sterling or my father. I saw the desperate, feral focus of a man who had finally found the one thing he needed to survive. I looked down at the ledger trembling in my hand, then back to the hallway. A heavy, rhythmic thudding was already echoing up the narrow stairwell of my Huo's apartment building. It wasn't the slow, shuffling gait of my elderly neighbor. It was the synchronized, deliberate footfalls of men who were climbing to a perty destination with violent intent. "They're on the second floor," Cassian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He stepped past me, invading my cramped kitchen without waiting for permission. "Do you have a rigid portfolio case? Acid-free glassine paper? We cannot roll a Brainers/in 16th century panel painting that has just been exposed to ethanol. It will crack the lapis." The fact that he knew exactly how to transport a chemically vulnerable Renaissance masterpiece did more to convince me than any plea could have. I bolted to my tiny supply closet, my pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against my blank throat. I tore past rows of cheap framing wire and mat boards, pulling out a heavy-duty, weather-resistant archival sleeve and a rigid backing board I used for high-end client deliveries. "How did you find me?" I demanded, rushing back to the kitchen table. My hands shook as I laid the glassine paper over the exposed face of the Madonna. "The estate sale," Cassian replied, moving with breathtaking efficiency. He secured the corners of the canvas to the backing board with archival tape, his long fingers working with the practiced grace of a seasoned conservator. "My grandmother died last month. My aunt, who knows nothing of our family's actual history, hired a liquidator to clear the house. By the time I found out, the sale was over. I spent the last 6 days tracking down the liquidator's cash, receipts, and cross-referencing license plates from neighborhood security. Cameras. I found you 3 hours ago." "And Julian?" I asked, my voice pitching up as the footsteps reached the third-floor landing. "Julian has had my family under surveillance for decades," Cassian said, sealing the archival sleeve and sliding it into the black portfolio case. He turned to me, his dark eyes locking onto mine. He knew my grandfather hid the painting. He just didn't know where. When his watchers saw me tearing the estate liquidator's office apart, they knew the Madonna was finally in play. "Grab the ledger, Linnea. Now." I shoved the yellowed, brittle letter into a waterproof plastic sleeve and stuffed it into my coat pocket. The footsteps reached the 4th floor. The heavy, unmistakable sound of a body slamming against the hallway security door vibrated through the thin walls of my apartment. "Fire escape," I whispered, pointing to the rusted window in my living room. We didn't hesitate. Cassian threw the portfolio strap over his shoulder, and I yanked the window open. The metal grating of the fire escape was slick with a sudden, freezing October downpour. I climbed out first, the icy rain immediately soaking through my thin sweater. Cassian followed, pulling the window shut just as my front door splintered inward with a deafening crack. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw 2 men in dark windbreakers tear into my placeless kitchen. They weren't armed with guns, but they moved with a ruthless, tactical precision, overturning my work table, sending bottles of solvent and magnifying lenses crashing to the linoleum. One of them looked toward the window. "Down," Cassian hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me down the rusted iron stairs. We descended the 4 flights in a frantic, slipping rush, the metal shrieking beneath our boots. My breath tore through my lungs like glass. I had spent my entire life in quiet archives and hushed galleries. This kind of visceral, Physical danger was entirely alien to me. Yet, as we hit the flooded alleyway, below, a strange, electric clarity washed over me. For 3 years, I had been a victim of my family's quiet, polite violence. Now, the violence was out in the open. Cassian led me through a maze of narrow alleyways, moving flawlessly through the Precedent on I. Shadows until we reached a sleek, unmarked black sedan idling in an underground parking structure 3 blocks away. We threw ourselves inside. Cassian gunned. The engine, the tires squealing against the damp concrete as we merged brutally into the heavy evening traffic, disappearing into the sea of red taillights. I slumped against the leather passenger seat, my chest heaving, my wet hair plastered to my face. I pulled the waterproof sleeve containing the ledger from my pocket, gripping it so tightly my fingers went numb. "Who was your grandfather?" I asked, the silence in the car growing too heavy to bear. Why did he have Elias Sterling's ledger? Why did he paint that hideous harbor scene? Cassian kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched as he navigated the slick streets. My grandfather was Evander. In the late 1940s, he was considered the most brilliant art restorer in Europe. He was a master of chemistry, a prodigy of pigment. But he was also starving in the aftermath of the war. Elias Sterling found him in a freezing studio in Vienna. Elias offered him a fortune to come to get imitators America and work exclusively for the Sterling Foundation. To restore their legitimate acquisitions, I guessed, though the sinking feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. To alter their stolen ones, Cassian corrected bitterly. Elias Sterling was a point-in-a-tent-to-be-day vulture. He capitalized on the chaos of the war, purchasing looted masterpieces from desperate smugglers for pennies. But he couldn't sell them or display them. The provenance was too radioactive. He needed Evander to alter the paintings, just enough to pass them off as different works, or to forge entirely new plays. Provenance documents, creating fake histories that stretched back centuries. I closed my eyes, the magnitude of the deception washing over me. The Aelbert. Kuyp, I whispered. The painting I refused to authenticate 3 years ago. The one that got me exiled from my family. Cassian nodded slowly. Evander painted that Kuyp in 1952. He was a prisoner by... Then, Elias had confiscated his passport, threatened his family, my grandmother. Evander was forced to churn out forgeries and alter stolen works to build the ferried 12th Sterling Empire. But Evander was brilliant, and he was angry. He began leaving microscopic chemical signatures in the paint, traces of modern synthetic binding, agents. He knew that eventually, forensic science would catch up, and someone with a good enough eye would spot the anomalies. And I did, I said, a hollow, bitter laugh escaping my lips. I spotted it. And my father destroyed my life for it. Your father didn't destroy your life because you made a mistake, Linnea. Cassian said softly, the car taking a sharp turn onto a bridge leading out of the city. He destroyed it because you were right. And if you had pulled that thread, the entire Sterling Empire would have unraveled. I looked down at the ledger. So how did Evander get the Madonna? It was Elias's ultimate prize, Cassian explained. The headlights of passing cars illuminating the hard planes of his face. Elias wanted Evander to strip the Madonna down and use the 16th century panel to paint a fake Rembrandt. It would have been the ultimate forgery. But Evander couldn't do it. Destroying a masterpiece of that magnitude broke him. So, he stole it. He smuggled it out of the Sterling vaults in the dead of night. To hide it, he painted that atrocious harbor scene over it using a heavy, fast-drying acrylic resin that he placed chemically formulated to be removable if you knew the exact solvent ratio. He stole Elias's master ledger, hid it behind the canvas, and fled. But he never exposed them, I noted. He died, Cassian said, his voice dropping to a painful whisper. A hit and run. 2 weeks later. Unsolved, of course. My grandmother hid the painting in her attic, completely unaware of what it was, thinking it was just one of Evander's failed landscapes. Elias Sterling spent the rest of his life looking for it. Julian Sterling inherited the hunt, and today, Julian almost got it back. We drove in silence for another hour, leaving the glittering skyline of the city far behind. We arrived at a sprawling, brutalist warehouse on the edge of the industrial harbor district. Cassian punched a code into a heavy steel door, and We drove the car directly into a freight elevator that lowered us into an extode, expansive subterranean space. When the lights flickered on, I gasped. It wasn't a warehouse, it was a state-of-the-art conservation laboratory. Rows of daylight-balanced LED panels hung from the high ceilings, custom ventilation hoods, infrared scanners, and chemical spectrometers lined the stainless steel workbenches. It was a facility that rivaled the Sterling Institute's own basement. "I've spent the last 10 years building this," Cassian said, lifting the Brost portfolio case from the back seat. Preparing for the day, I finally found what my grandfather hid. We moved to the central workbench. Cassian gently unsealed the portfolio and slid the Madonna out, placing it under the bright, unforgiving light. The single, luminous eye I had uncovered stared up at us, an anchor of pure, 16th-century genius trapped in a sea of muddy gray overpaint. I carefully extracted the ledger from my pocket and laid it flat on the raised, stainless steel table. Under the intense LED lights, the faded ink seemed to leap off the page. It was a terrifying document. Dates, locations, the names of corrupt customs officials, Swiss bank account routing numbers. It was a step-by-step blueprint of the greatest art heist in American history. But as I read down the list of names, tracing the flow of illicit money, my finger stopped on a paragraph near the bottom of the second page. The blood drained entirely from my head. The room seemed to tilt, the humming of tarpus, the ventilation system fading into a distant, underwater roar. Laundered through the Secondary Acquisitions Board, verified and sealed by A. Vane. Vane. Alistair Vane. My father. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. I stepped back from the table, my hands trembling so violently I had to press them against my thighs to stop them. "No. This is from 1951. My father wasn't even born yet." Cassian stepped closer, his expression softening with a terrible, devastating pity. He reached out and tapped a second column on the ledger, written in a different, sharper handwriting, a newer ink. "Evander didn't just document Elias's crimes," Cassian said gently. "He documented the foundation of the network. Elias built a system. Julian inherited it. But Julian needed someone to run the authentication side of the laundering operation in the modern era. He needed a gatekeeper, someone who could legitimize the fakes and bury the stolen works with absolute authority." I stared at the secondary column. It listed dates from the late 1980s, the 1990s. The exact timeline of my father's meteoric rise through the Sterling Institute. "My father," I choked out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "My father isn't just a sycophant. He's the architect. He's the one who signs the fake certificates. He's the one who turns the stolen art into clean money." The memories rushed back with blinding, sickening clarity. My father's absolute fury in the boardroom 3 years ago. The way he hadn't even looked at the chemical analysis I had prepared. He didn't need to look at it because he already knew the Kype was a fake. He had probably commissioned it. When I exposed the forgery, I wasn't just embarrassing him, I was threatening to pull the pin on a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise that he was running. "He kicked me out," I whispered, tears finally breaking free, hot and humiliating, tracking down my cold cheeks. "He cut me out of the family. He convinced my mother and Serafina that I was a hysterical liability. Because I was actually doing the job he pretended to do. He destroyed his own daughter to protect his money." Cassian didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell me it was going to be okay. He understood that when the foundational myth of your entire life is shattered, platitudes are an insult. "He chose the lie over you, Linnea," Cassian said, his voice hard but resonant, with a shared ancestral grief. "Just like Elias Sterling chose greed over my grandfather's life. We are both casualties of their empire, but we don't have to be casualties anymore." I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The profound, hollow grief of losing my family was rapidly transmuting into something else, something hot, dense, and sharp. Rage. "The ledger is proof of the historical crimes," I said, my voice steadying, growing colder. "But Julian's lawyers could argue its ancient history. They could claim the modern Sterling Institute had no knowledge of Elias's actions. To destroy them, to truly destroy my father and Julian, we need to connect this ledger to the present day. We need to prove my father is actively using this network. Cassian pointed to a series of encrypted alphanumeric codes written in the margins of the ledger. These are account ciphers. Evander wrote in his diary that Elias kept a master key, a physical object that translates these codes into the offshore bank accounts where the Sterling Institute hides its illicit funds. If we get the key, we expose the money. If we expose the money, Julian and your father go to federal prison for the rest of their lives. Where is the key? I asked, leaning over the table, the adrenaline surging. Back. Evander believed Elias hid it in plain sight, in the one place no one would ever dare dismantle or question. The centerpiece of his legacy. Cassian looked up, his dark eyes locking with mine. The Sterling Institute, specifically, inside Elias's private vault in the executive wing. A bitter, incredulous laugh bubbled up in my throat. The executive wing is a fortress, Cassian. It requires biometric access. Armed guards. Since I was fired, my biometrics have been wiped. If I get within 50 feet of that building, Julian's security will have me arrested, or worse. We don't need to break in at night, Cassian said, a dangerous, calculating smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We are going to walk through the tapeless front door with an invitation. I stared at him. What invitation? The Sterling Centennial Gala is in 4 days, Cassian said. The entire global art elite will be there. Julian, your father, your sister. It is the social event of the decade. And the centerpiece of the auction that night is going to be a newly discovered, fully authenticated Dutch masterpiece. The Kuip, I realized, my blood running cold. The forgery I refused to sign. They kept it. They waited 3 years for the dust to settle, and now they're selling it to wash the money. Exactly, Cassian said. They are confident. They think they erased you. They think no one is left to challenge them. We are going to attend that gala. Linnea. We are going to infiltrate the executive vault while they are all distracted by the auction, find the cipher key, and then we are going to walk onto that stage and project Elias Sterling's ledger onto the wall for the entire world to see. It was suicide. It was a wildly impossible, deeply cinematic fantasy that would likely end with both of us in a shallow grave. But as I looked at the luminous eye of the weeping Madonna, and as I thought of my father sitting at his close, pristine dining table, clinking glasses with the men who had orchestrated my ruin, I felt the last tether of my old life snap. Serafina could have the society pages. My mother could have her pristine reputation. My father could have his blood money. I was going to take the truth, and I was going to burn their house to the ground. With it. Okay, I said, the word echoing with finality in the cavernous lab. But to get into that gala, we need cover identities that stand up to Julian's vetting. We need a way past the biometric locks. And if we're going to expose the Kuip as a fake on live stage, I need to bring the exact chemical solvent that will strip the synthetic paint off the canvas in front of 500 people. Cassian's smile widened. I can handle the identities and the biometrics. Can. You handle the chemistry? I looked at the Q-tip sitting on the table, stained with the gray paint of the harbor scene. I'm my father's daughter, I said, the irony tasting like venom. I know exactly how to break down a masterpiece. For the next 3 days, Cassian's underground bunker became a war room. We barely slept. We subsisted on black coffee and adrenaline. While Cassian worked, his shadow network forging our gala invitations under the guise of eccentric European tech billionaires, mapping the security grid of the Sterling Institute, and hacking into the catering staff's frequency, I became a mad scientist. I didn't just need a solvent. I needed a solvent that was highly volatile, fast-acting, and precise enough to melt through acrylic resin without damaging the theoretical 16th century canvas underneath. It had to be dramatic. It had to be instantaneous. And as I worked, a strange, profound intimacy grew between Cassian and me. We were two ghosts haunting the same machine. We understood each other in a language of lost legacies and stolen histories. Late on the second night, as we stood shoulder to shoulder over a bubbling beaker of xylene and isopropyl alcohol, his hand brushed mine. He didn't pull away. What will you do? He asked quietly, the blue flame of the Bunsen burner reflecting in his eyes. After we burn it down, Your family will be destroyed. You will never be able to go back to them. I never had a family, Cassian, I replied, looking down at our hands. I had a warden and a PR team. I'm not destroying my family. I'm just finally accepting that they never existed. Cassian turned his hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. His grip was warm, anchoring, a stark contrast to the sterile cold of my past. Then we build something new from the ashes, he promised. On the fourth night, the evening of the Centennial Gala, I stood in front of a classed plaid, full-length mirror in the bunker's small living quarters. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Cassian had procured a gown of deep, iridescent emerald silk that moved like liquid glass. My usually messy hair was swept into a severe, elegant chignon. Around my neck rested a genuine diamond collar loaned from a contact of Cassian's that felt like cold armor against my skin. I didn't look like Linnea. Vain, the disgraced junior appraiser in a dusty sweater. I looked like a predator. Cassian stepped up behind me in the mirror. He wore a perfectly tailored, midnight blue tuxedo. He looked like old money, dangerous and untouchable. He reached out, gently clasping a small silver clutch and placing it in my hands. Inside the clutch was a specially designed aerosol canister, no larger than a tube of lipstick, filled with the hyper-accelerated solvent I had synthesized. Ready? He asked, his breath ghosting over my shoulder. Let's go steal my life back, I said. The Sterling Institute of Fine Arts was a fortress of limestone and glass, dominating the city skyline. Tonight, it was bathed in gold uplighting, a beacon of immense, untouchable wealth. Limousines idled in a line that stretched down the block, disgorging billionaires, politicians, and celebrities onto a red carpet flanked by aggressive paparazzi. Cassian and I arrived in a hired Bentley. When the driver opened the door, the flashbulbs exploded like a strobe light. I didn't flinch. I channeled every ounce of my mother's practiced, icy disdain, lifting my chin and gliding up the face. Marble steps with Cassian's hand resting firmly at the small of my back. At the entrance, Julian's private security detail flanked the gold-plated doors. They weren't just checking invitations, they were scanning faces, cross-referencing guest lists with real-time biometric software. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as we approached the lead guard. Invitations, please, the guard said, his eyes hard and assessing. Cassian handed over the heavy, embossed cards. Maximilian and Elena Vance. He said, his accent shifting flawlessly into something vaguely European, rich, and bored. The guard scanned the barcode. The light on his tablet blinked green. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over my face. For a terrifying second, I thought the facial recognition software had flagged me, but Cassian's hacker contact had been thorough. My biometrics in the Sterling database hadn't just been wiped. 3 years ago, they had been replaced entirely with a composite image. To the machine and to the guard, I was Elena Vance, a reclusive heiress to a shipping fortune. Enjoy your evening, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, the guard said, stepping aside. We walked into the grand atrium, and the sheer opulence of the event hit me like a physical blow. The hall was decorated with thousands of white orchids, cascading from the vaulted ceiling. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of crystal champagne, flutes, and there they were, standing near the center of the room, holding court beneath a massive chandelier, was my family. My father looked impossibly distinguished in his bespoke tuxedo, laughing heartily at a joke made by a visiting senator. My mother stood beside him, draped in diamonds, looking like the undisputed queen of the society pages, and Serafina, glowing in a champagne-colored gown, was clutching the arm of Silas, Sterling, playing the role of the devoted, adoring wife to perfection. A visceral wave of nausea and grief washed over me. For 25 years, I had desperately wanted to be in that circle. I had wanted my father to look at me the way he looked at Serafina. Now, I saw the circle for what it was, a barricade of lies, built on the backs of ruined lives and stolen histories. Don't look at them, Cassian murmured, his lips barely moving as he handed me a glass of champagne. Keep your eyes on the target. Julian is moving toward the podium. The auction starts in 20 minutes. That's our window. I forced my gaze away from my family and tracked Julian Sterling. He was moving smoothly through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, looking every bit the benevolent patron of the arts. He stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. A hushed, expectant silence fell over the massive room. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian's voice boomed, rich and resonant. Welcome to the Centennial Gala of the Sterling Institute. Tonight, we celebrate a century of preserving the truth and beauty of human history. The hypocrisy of the words made my jaw clench. In just a few moments, Julian continued, gesturing dramatically to a velvet-draped easel on the main stage. We will auction a piece that will redefine our understanding of the Dutch Golden Age. But first, please enjoy the Pleasenagin. Champagne, view the exhibits in the East Wing, and prepare your checkbooks. 4. Art, my friends, is the only true immortality. The crowd applauded politely, the low murmur of conversation resuming. Now, Cassian whispered. We moved purposefully through the crowd, heading away from the stage and toward the heavily guarded corridor that led to the executive wing. Two massive, suited Bartkey guards stood before the frosted glass doors, their arms crossed. This area is restricted to executive board members only, the larger guard said, stepping forward as we approached. I know, Cassian said, his voice dropping the European affectation entirely. Julian sent us. He needs the provenance file for the Kype. He left it in his desk. Mr. Sterling didn't authorize any. Cassian didn't let him finish. He moved with a sudden, shocking violence, a blur of motion that was so fast and precise it seemed almost choreographed. He struck the first guard in the throat, a sharp, disabling blow that sent the massive man crumpling to the floor, gasping for air. Before the second guard could reach for his radio, Cassian swept his leg out, catching the man behind the knees, and drove the heel of his palm into the guard's temple as he fell. It took less than 4 seconds. Both men were unconscious on the marble floor. I stood frozen, staring at Cassian in shock. I told you, Cassian said, stepping over the bodies and swiping the first guard's keycard. I've been preparing for 10 years. Let's go. He swiped the card, and the frosted glass doors slid open. We ran down the hushed, plushly carpeted hallway of the executive wing. The air here was colder, smelling of expensive leather and polished wood. We reached the heavy oak door of Elias Sterling's original office, now Julian's private sanctuary. Cassian pressed a small electronic device against the biometric scanner next to the door. It was a cloning tool, preloaded with the guard's fingerprints. A second later, the lock clicked, and we pushed inside. The office was a monument to ego. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, and oil portraits of Elias and Julian Sterling staring down from the walls with identical expressions of haughty superiority. The vault is behind Elias, Cassian said, moving toward the portrait of his grandfather's tormentor. He felt along the heavy gilded frame, finding a hidden latch. The portrait swung dake outward on silent hinges, revealing a sleek, modern titanium vault door embedded in the wall. It required a retinal scan and a 12-digit alphanumeric code. The retinal scan is a closed-loop system, Cassian muttered, pulling a thin laptop from inside his jacket. I can bypass the optics with a localized EMP, but the code is air-gapped. It's hardwired. We have to guess it, and we only get 3 tries before it triggers a silent alarm and locks down the building. I stared at the keypad, panic rising in my chest. A 12-digit code? Cassian? There are trillions of combinations. How are we supposed to guess? Think, Linnea, Cassian said, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he wired a small disruptor to the retinal scanner. Elias Sterling built this empire. He built the laundering network. He hid the ledger. What was the most important date to him? What was the foundation of his ego? I closed my eyes, forcing my mind back to the archives, back to the dusty biographies and historical records I had memorized as a child. Elias Sterling. The founding of the Institute. The acquisition of his first major collection. The Weeping Madonna, I whispered, my eyes snapping open. Cassian. Elias used the Madonna as collateral to secure the original loans that built this foundation. It was his cornerstone. What was the date he acquired it? My grandfather forged the first transfer documents on the 12th of November 1951, Cassian said, the disruptor sparking as it fried the retinal scanner. The light above the keypad turned blue, awaiting the code. But that's only 6. Digits. Yksi, kaksi, viisi, yksi. What else? I asked frantically. What did he combine it with? His initials? Cassian suggested. No, Elias was arrogant, but he was systematic. He thought of this foundation as a dynasty. I looked at the portrait of Elias, at the cold, calculating eyes. What's the Institute's incorporation number? The legal foundation of the Empire? I don't know it, Cassian said, tension radiating from him. I do, I said, my voice steadying. I had to type it on every appraisal form I ever filed. 040882. Try it, Cassian urged. The date he stole the Madonna, and the date he legitimized his theft. I reached out with a trembling hand and punched the keys. 一到一, 一到二, 五到一, 零到四, 零到八, 八到二. I pressed enter. For 2 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, a heavy mechanical clank echoed from deep within the wall. The titanium door hissed, the hydraulic seals, releasing, and it swung open. We didn't cheer, we just moved. Inside the vault, rows of velvet-lined safety deposit boxes gleamed under small, motion sensor lights. Cassian began pulling them open, tossing aside stacks of bearer bonds, diamond necklaces, and offshore property deeds. It has to be something physical, Cassian muttered, tearing through the boxes. A book, a template, a cipher cylinder. I moved to the bottom row, pulling open a heavy steel drawer. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, was an object that looked completely out of place among the jewels and bonds. It was a small, antique brass cryptex, a mechanical puzzle box composed of rotating dials engraved with letters and numbers. Cassian, I called out, lifting the heavy brass cylinder. He rushed over, his eyes widening. That's it. It's a Visionaire cipher cylinder. Elias used it to generate the routing numbers for the offshore accounts. The codes in the ledger. If we align them on this cylinder, it will reveal the cylinder 12, exact bank accounts where the money is hidden today. I shoved the cryptex into my clutch alongside the aerosol solvent. We have the key. We have the ledger. Let's go before... Before what? A voice said from the doorway. I froze. Cassian slowly turned around. Standing in the open doorway of the office, holding a suppressed pistol aimed directly at Cassian's chest, was my father. He didn't look distinguished or jovial anymore. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes wide, his tuxedo jacket pushed back to accommodate the weapon. Behind him stood Julian Sterling, his face a mask of cold patrician fury. Linnea, my father said, his voice laced with a bizarre, twisted disappointment. When the facial recognition flagged a composite anomaly at the Creeple Lake front door, I thought it was a corporate spy. I never imagined my own daughter would be stupid enough to come back here. I'm not here for your approval, Dad, I said, my voice trembling, though I fought violently to keep it steady. I'm here for the truth. Julian stepped into the room, his gaze flicking to the open vault, then to the clutch in my hand. The truth is, whatever I say it is, Linnea, you learned that 3 years ago. I see you found Elias's little antique. It doesn't matter. You have no proof of what it does. We have the ledger, Julian, Cassian said, stepping slightly in front of me, shielding me with his body, my grandfather's ledger. It documents everything. And now we have the key to prove the money is still flowing. Julian's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine alarm breaking his composed facade. But he quickly recovered, a cruel smile touching his lips. Evander's ledger. Myth. But even if it isn't, you are 2 trespassers who assaulted my guards and broke into my vault. Alistair, shoot the man. We'll make it look like a robbery. Gone wrong. The girl we will deal with quietly. My father raised the gun, his hand remarkably steady. He was pointing a lethal weapon at the man standing in front of me, and he wasn't hesitating. Dad, don't, I pleaded, the reality of his corruption crashing down on me. Entirely. You're not a murderer. You're an appraiser. I am a survivor, Linnea, my father snarled, his eyes flashing with raw, ugly desperation. I built this family. I built our name. You were perfectly content to live in the luxury I provided until you decided your pathetic morality was more important than my legacy. You betrayed me. You betrayed art, I screamed back, the rage finally detonating. You sold out. History for a seat at the table. You ruined my life because I wouldn't lie for you. And I will end it to protect myself, my father said coldly. He tightened his cordie, finger on the trigger. Cassian didn't wait. He threw himself sideways, diving behind the massive, a mahogany desk, just as the suppressed pistol let out a sharp, muted pfft. Bullet shattered the glass of Elias Sterling's portrait, raining shards down. Upon us. Linnea, run, Cassian shouted. I didn't run. I moved with a desperate, reckless instinct. I grabbed a heavy, bronze sculpture of a falcon from the edge of the desk and hurled it directly at Julian Sterling. It hit him square in the chest, knocking him backward into the doorframe with a gasp of pain. My father turned the gun toward me, but Cassian erupted from behind the desk, tackling my father to the ground. The gun skittered across the polished floor. Get to the ballroom, Cassian yelled, wrestling with my father, delivering a brutal elbow to his ribs. Expose the painting. I'll hold them off. I didn't argue. I grabbed my clutch, stepped over Julian, who was clutching his ribs and gasping for air, and sprinted down the hallway. I burst through the frosted glass doors and back into the grand atrium. The atmosphere had completely shifted. The string quartet had stopped. The lights had dimmed, leaving only the main stage illuminated. The auction was beginning. I pushed through the crowd of billionaires and socialites, ignoring the Lennox by day. Indignant gasps as I elbowed my way to the front. On the stage, the auctioneer, a slick man with a British accent, was standing beside the velvet-draped easel. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing through the massive hall. The moment you have been waiting for, the Sterling Institute is proud to unveil a lost masterpiece of the Dutch Golden Age. A pristine, newly discovered landscape by Aelbert Cuyp. Opening bid will commence at $25 million. He reached out and pulled the velvet drape away. The crowd erupted into polite, awed applause. The painting sat under the painting. Dramatic spotlights, a moody, beautiful depiction of a Dutch river, cows grazing. On the bank, the sky a luminous golden hour yellow. It was a beautiful painting. It was a perfect lie. I didn't stop at the edge of the crowd. I climbed the short steps to the stage, the heavy silk of my emerald gown rustling loudly. The auctioneer stared at me, in shock. Excuse me, madam, you cannot be up here. I ignored him. I walked directly to the easel, unclasped my clutch, and pulled out the aerosol canister. This painting, I shouted, my voice carrying over the murmurs of the confused crowd, is a forgery. It was painted in 1952 by a man named Evander, a prisoner of Elias Sterling. The crowd fell into a shocked, absolute silence. I saw my mother in the front row, her face drained of all color, her hand flying to her throat. Serafina looked like she was going to faint. Linnea? My mother gasped, her voice shrill and terrified. The Sterling Institute is a front for laundering stolen art, I yelled, raising the canister. And I have the proof. Security! The auctioneer shrieked into the microphone. Get her off the place! Stage. Two massive guards began rushing down the center aisle, but they were too late. I pointed the nozzle of the aerosol canister directly at the center of the Cuyp, right where the beautiful golden sky met the horizon. And I pressed the button. The hyper-accelerated solvent hit the canvas in a fine, pressurized mist. For a second, nothing happened. The crowd held its collective breath. Then, the chemistry reacted. The synthetic binding agents in Evander's 1952 paint, formulated specifically to break down under this exact solvent, dissolved instantly. The beautiful, golden sky began to melt. The paint didn't just drip. It sloughed off the canvas in thick, muddy sheets, revealing the stark, blinding white of the modern gesso underneath. The cows, the river, the masterful Dutch lighting, it all melted away in seconds, pooling on the stage floor in a toxic, gray puddle. The crowd erupted into screams and shouts of horror. Cameras began flashing. Wildly, the paparazzi at the back of the room capturing the destruction of a $25 million masterpiece in real time. I stood there, panting, holding the empty canister, staring at the ruined canvas. I had just destroyed millions of dollars of perceived value. I had just destroyed my father's legacy. She's insane, my mother screamed, pointing at me, tears streaming down her face. Arrest her. The guards reached the stage, grabbing my arms roughly and hauling me backward. I didn't fight them. I let them pull me, keeping my eyes fixed on the blank white canvas. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed over the sound system. It wasn't the auctioneer. Ladies and gentlemen, please look at the screens above the stage. Cassian. I turned my head. Cassian stood in the sound booth at the back of the room, bruised and bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but standing tall. Behind the ruined canvas, the massive projection screens that had been displaying the Institute's logo flickered. Suddenly, the screen filled with the image of a yellowed, handwritten letter. Elias Sterling's ledger. Cassian spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing with absolute, damning authority. What you are looking at is the foundational document of the Sterling Institute, a ledger detailing the theft and trafficking of 23 priceless works of art stolen during the Second World War. And on the second page, you will see the names of the men who continued that laundering operation. To this day, he clicked a button, and the image zoomed in on the secondary column. The names were projected 50 feet high for the entire world to see. Julian Sterling, Alistair Vane. The room erupted into absolute bedlam. Billionaires were shouting, reporters were scrambling over chairs to get photos of the screen, and the board members were staring at the ledger in sheer, unadulterated terror. I looked down at my family in the front row. My mother was sobbing, uncontrollably, covering her face. Serafina was backing away from Silas. Sterling, her perfect, curated life collapsing around her. And then, I saw my father. He was standing at the entrance to the ballroom, flanked by the two guards Cassian had knocked out earlier. He looked at the massive projection of his blank name, his crimes broadcast to the very society he had sold his soul to impress. He looked at me, standing on the stage, held by security. All the arrogant, cruel power he had wielded over me for 28 years evaporated in an instant. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked small. He looked destroyed. He had chosen the lie, and the lie had finally burned him alive. Cassian's voice cut through the chaos one last time. The FBI has already been provided with the physical ledger, the cipher key, and the account numbers. The Sterling Institute is over. The guards holding me suddenly let go, realizing that the people paying their salaries were about to be arrested for federal crimes. They backed away, leaving me standing alone on the stage next to the melted painting. Cassian emerged from the sound booth, walking calmly down the center aisle. Through the panicked crowd, he climbed the stairs to the stage, ignored the stage, ignored the stage, ignored the beige, screaming auctioneer, and took my hand. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked softly. I looked at my father, who was now being surrounded by furious board members and flashing cameras. I looked at my mother, who hadn't once looked up to check if I was okay. "I am home," I said, squeezing Cassian's hand. We walked off the stage, out the back exit, and into the cool, cleansing rain of the October night. The fallout was spectacular. A slow-motion detonation that consumed the city's elite for months. The FBI raided the Sterling Institute the following morning. Julian Sterling and my father were arrested and indicted on 74 counts of fraud, money laundering, and trafficking stolen property. The trial was a media circus. My father's defense lawyers tried to claim he was a victim of Julian's manipulation, but the cipher key and the ledger proved he was a willing, highly compensated architect of the fraud. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Julian received 30. My mother filed for divorce the day my father was indicted, desperately trying to salvage whatever social standing she had left. It didn't work. She became a pariah, forced to sell the family estate and move into a small condominium on Slash Splash, in the outskirts of the city. Serafina's engagement to Silas Sterling was dissolved in a highly publicized, bitter split. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't reach out to my mother or my sister. The day they threw me out of their house for refusing to sign a lie was the day they ceased to be my family. I felt no obligation to mourn the destruction of strangers. As for Cassian and me, we didn't disappear. Using the evidence we provided, the federal government was able to track down and recover 19 of the 23 stolen paintings listed in Elias's ledger. They were repatriated to their rightful owners or donated to ethical museums around the world. And the Weeping Madonna? Because Cassian was the direct descendant of the man who had hidden it, and because the original Florentine owners had died without heirs, the courts awarded the masterpiece to him. But we didn't keep it. We sold it at a public, highly vetted auction. It went for $85 million. We used the money to buy the warehouse where Cassian had built his lab. We expanded it, outfitting it with the best conservation technology in the world. We opened our own authentication and restoration firm, dedicated entirely to verifying the provenance of looted and displaced art. We became the gatekeepers of the truth. I am sitting in our lab right now. It is a quiet Tuesday morning. The sunlight is streaming through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Cassian is at the workbench across from me, carefully removing centuries of grime from a small Renaissance panel. He looks up, catches my eye, and smiles. It is a warm, anchoring smile, a promise of safety that I never had. In my childhood, I look down at my own workbench. I am not working on a masterpiece today. I am framing a small, inexpensive print for a local client. I carefully measure the mat board, cut the glass, and seal the backing. I think about the $5 painting of the ugly harbor scene. I think about the truth hiding beneath the heavy, muddy clouds, waiting for someone with the right eyes to see it, waiting for someone brave enough to wash away the lie. My family tried to bury me under their ambition, their greed, their need for a perfect, unbroken surface. They thought they could paint over me. They didn't realize that the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, never truly dries. It just waits for the solvent.